Okay, I'm here with Chris Wilson, and we just had a nice animated chat about complexity in development right now. So there was a big hoo-ha in the last few weeks about how complex it is to learn JavaScript in 2016. What do you think? Have we lost the focus there, or is it just too exciting to try new things all the time?
I think there are multiple ways of looking at it. There are multiple types of developers as they look at this. And I personally am definitely I like to learn things that are very close to the metal, like very close, very low level, and understand how they work before I layer up from that. But this also is kind of a drawback in some ways because I have an aversion to a bunch of like high-level frameworks and things. And those aren't necessarily bad. Like they're a good way to get started. They're a great way to build applications. And at some point you need that level of structure. And if you're going to deploy something over and over and over again and maintain it over a long period of time, you can't build everything in assembly language, right? I mean, this was when I started out in development, that was the big thing, is people didn't write in assembly anymore. You know, they had to write in C++ or something like that because of structured language, you could maintain it better. And I think that to some degree, the same is true of web development now. Like we've grown up past you can write everything down to the metal in your language of choice with nothing on the sides and ship that in production. The most important part, of course, is that you can maintain it over time and that you can grow it. And part of the upset a few weeks ago is really partly somebody making some comments about stuff like you would use all these things at once. And you shouldn't use anything you're not willing to learn well enough to know you're using it right. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't use a bunch of those things. Probably not going to use them all, though.
It seems like the half-time of those things is tricky. I mean,
yes.
I'm a busy person, and I see these cool new things, and by the time I get time to try them out, you already get the first post like, oh, they're dangerous, don't use them.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Are we getting addicted to impressing each other rather than building things for development use?
Well, I mean, I think there's no harm in being addicted to building impressive things, because I think that's how impressive things get built. I think the challenge is understanding at every level that you have to build things for the long term when you're going to maintain them. And it's interesting to see very different types of development. Like there are some products that they will ship and be popular for brief periods of time, and then they're kind of going to go away. Like they're not going to be continual parts of people's lives for 15 years. At the same time, there are plenty of software products that have been around a super long time and continue to be very popular. And certainly, here at Microsoft, there's a bunch of products that have been super successful for actual software generations of people and even actual generations of people. And that's kind of, that's a big responsibility, I think. As the web has matured into a real software platform, we've got the same problems.
It seems to me that criticism is always too fast and not taken on quickly enough. My favorite was when we had the whole debate about using frameworks and how they actually slow down the whole process in the end, that we punish the end user for basically developer convenience. Mm-hmm. But then you see, for example, Ember, that was very much on in the crossfire of a lot of people for being very slow and taking like 1.9 seconds to render or even to be functional. And then they did like a lot of extra changes to the library, and now it actually seems to be much better. Do we have to go through that fight and aggression all the time, or is it hard to contribute to these products?
Probably asking me questions like that during the U.S. election cycle is a rough time to say, shouldn't we just all be more civil about this?
Yeah.
I certainly would prefer that we were all a little more civil about it. I do think that people have different takes on things and different, not only different motivations, but just different allergies, I guess, things that they're going to get upset about and other people aren't. And I think that at this point in time with the web, it is very critical that we be very concerned about load times and performance in general. Like I think that's one of the core things the web has needed to improve on. It's something that we've focused a lot on at Google for the last 4 years probably, as sort of a end-to-end performance, not just how fast can you do these function calls or how fast does the browser start up, but how fast can we enable web developers to be? And how do we get to a point where 60 frames a second is the default for everyone? And hopefully beyond that at some point if there's a reason to do it.
It's quite fun when you come to low-level development, and I remember you writing games on Commodore 64 and things like that, where you really you had to make it really smooth and fast with double buffering every animation and those things. And then with the web, we're just like, okay, you don't need to worry about these things. And then when JavaScript became more powerful, out of a sudden we're back at that. So is there, I'm not quite sure we learned the right things in computer science, but is there an opportunity to teach people the performance of computing before they actually start getting into development better?
Absolutely. I think that probably the biggest thing that I try to encourage every developer that I talk to do is understand their role in how their web app performs. And if you're a developer and you're watching this right now, listening to it, if you're not a pro at the profiling tools in your browser of choice, like just go open up DevTools right now, go into the profiling tools, see how fast it's rendering. Like if you don't know how to do that, look it up online. There's plenty of resources that will help guide you through this. But I find so many developers who still, they're surprised when they ask me, hey, this is really janky and I don't understand why, and I open up the profiling tools and it's like, well, your call right there is taking 45 milliseconds. And they're like, okay, what does that mean? They're like, yes, you have to think at this level now because it is the level that we've gotten to with the web. At one point, all we were doing was effectively static document rendering. And then we got to dynamic document rendering where the dynamics were not that big a deal because they weren't often, they weren't common. And then we got to the point where they were super common and we were dynamically changing everything and large chunks of things, and we really had to worry about this, and we didn't worry about it enough, and I think that's partly where we got to where we are.
It's interesting. It's amazing what we can do in browsers nowadays, and I just, in my last talks, I talked about how cool it is to sit on a plane and be able to debug your own thing and test it, and test it on your mobile phone as well. But developer tools are a complex beast, especially in Chrome.
Yes.
Do you think there's a chance that we have overshot the mark by putting too many things in? Is there a need for doing UX purging of developer tools?
I don't think there's a need for a purge. I think there's a need for constant improvement. And I think that actually all the developer tools teams are doing that. They're very active in development, not just Chrome's, but the other browsers as well. I think the important part of that is that the browser developer tools are the best way to get insight into what the browser is actually doing. Like you can learn what's actually going on. And when we first had the ability to plug a mobile device into those browser tools and then use all the same set of dev tools on the desktop to explore what was happening on the device, I found this stunning, right? This was just amazing to have this kind of insight because you could actually figure out what was going on. You didn't have to do the old I'm going to do printfs everywhere kind of tricks that I'd grown up with. And I think that I'd rather have too many tools than not enough. I think the challenge is still making them approachable and making it so you can walk a developer through, okay, this is where you start. And like with the application pane, the new application pane in Chrome DevTools, I think we're doing a pretty good job of collecting things that are app-like. Performance is a really tough one because there's very different aspects of performance, and I think we've still got some work to do there.
It's fun to keep the developer tools open nowadays and serve the web a bit. It seems to me a lot of people don't understand that debugging in a live site is a security problem because there is so many things where you just get internals of the application because people were too lazy to have a single build script that takes out all console logs.
I think I just tweeted the other day that, it seems like I open up the dev tools on random sites far too often just to fix really bad UI that I just can't deal with anymore. Particularly the, hey, I'm going to obscure a third of your browser window with an ad and not let you close it. Like, that's crazy. That just makes your site unusable for me, and I'm really unlikely to click that ad. But it turns out you can fix that with DevTools.
Do you think there is a problem that when it comes to the rise of the full stack developer, and I keep talking about this right now, that the amount of filtering that you have to do from things that can go onto your server is what people underestimate. Like, it's nice to set up a full server with JavaScript, but you have the same security problems you have with your PHP Apache server before.
I mean, any anything that goes from a client to a server should absolutely be validated, right? It should absolutely be treated as insecure. Like you just don't know what's coming from the other end. You don't know if it's a hacker trying to replicate a system that you've built. You have no idea. And so you're going to have to fix that problem. And I mean, this is not a new problem, right? Like database execution attacks have been around for approximately forever. Certainly my whole career. So this isn't a big surprise. I think anyone who relies on, oh, nobody else is going to poke into my system, you will quickly discover they will.
So how do we deal with third-party services then in JavaScript? There's a question I always get, like, okay, I got a secret and a key that allows me to use this service that I pay a lot of money for, and I just put it in a JavaScript file and hope nobody finds it.
Yeah, that's a bit of a challenge too. I'm not really that well versed with the security there, but I think that there are ways to better protect those systems. I think that watching your own analytics for those services too, and making sure that they're not getting used in surprising ways outside what you would expect, is probably important.
So what would you say nowadays, if you were a new developer, what is the main old school thing that sounds boring but will give you a lot of benefit from knowing?
Main old school thing. I think that the biggest lesson that I learned I had a very traditional college education. I majored in computer science at a major university well known for its CS school. And yet still, I didn't feel like a lot of my degree program was about actual programming. Like I learned more from my part-time job about programming than anything else. But there were still a few lessons that were critically important. Certainly learning data structures really well and the use of different data structures. And this has changed over time because there are very different data patterns than there are now than there were when I started. But also deeply intuitively understanding how your algorithms react at scale. And this is one of the things that Google is stunningly good at, that, beyond me, frankly, because it's not really the teams that I work in, but being able to scale out to just billions and billions of queries, that's kind of amazing to me because I still think in very small terms compared to that. But still, particularly with the audio work that I do, like, you have to think about the cost of anything you do and how that's going to affect your algorithm running in time. I think this is important for any developer doing profiling too, because they have to look and see how they're going to react when their data changes. And is it still going to scroll that quickly when you have a much bigger data set? Can you still, load that many items and have it be a good UI?
Cool. Well, thanks for that.